Welcome back, everybody, for this next session on AI featuring election officials. My name is David Kimball. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Very happy to be here. Let me introduce our panelists, starting at the far end. Amy Cohen is Executive Director of the National Association of State Election Directors. In that role, she works closely with state and territorial officials from all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the 5 U.S. territories, as well as with various federal agencies and other partners. She has a Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science from Washington University in St. Louis, whoop, whoop, and a Master's of Public Policy from Georgetown University. Next to Amy is Kurt Bahr. Kurt has been the elected director of elections for St. Charles County, Missouri since 2019. St. Charles County Election Authority has 13 full-time employees, serves about 300,000 voters. He is the second vice president for the Missouri Association of County Clerks and Election Authorities and co-chairs its legislative committee. He also sits on the steering committee for the Partnership of Large Election Jurisdictions. He served as a state representative here in Missouri from 2011 to 2018. While there, he was on the Budget, Education, Veterans, Small Business, Professional Registration, and Children and Families Committees. He chaired both the Education Appropriations and the General Administration Appropriations Committees. Kurt served as a finance officer in the U.S. Air Force from 2002 to 2006. He earned the Election Center's CIRA certification in 2021. Kurt also earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in History and Political Science from Oklahoma Wesleyan University and a Master's degree in Public Policy from Regent University. Next to Kurt is Brianna Lennon. She's the county clerk in Boone County, Missouri, where she has served also since 2019. Brianna is also the founder and co-host, along with Eric Fay, the Director of Elections in St. Louis County, of the High Turnout Wide Margins podcast, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. She and Eric talk to subject matter election experts and local administrators to ask questions that are most meaningful to their work. Brianna previously served as Senior Deputy Counsel and Deputy Director of Elections for the Missouri Secretary of State's Office and as Assistant Attorney General for the Missouri Attorney General's Office. Brianna earned her JD from the University of Missouri-Columbia Law School and her MPA in Public Affairs and Nonprofit Management from the University of Missouri-Columbia. Next to Brianna is Ben Borgmeyer. He is the Democratic Director of Elections for St. Louis City Board of Elections here in Missouri. Ben is a former associate attorney at the Rosenblum and Fry law firm. Previously, he served as a Missouri State Public Defender for several years. Ben earned his JD from St. Louis University School of Law and a BA from DePaul University in English, History, and French. And last but not least, Matt Crane is Executive Director of the Colorado County Clerks Association, where he has served since 2021, where he leads statewide strategy, advocacy, and communications for all 64 Colorado County Clerk and Recorder offices. Matt's an election security expert who consults on critical infrastructure risk management. Previously, he was Arapahoe County Clerk and Recorder for over a decade and also served as Election Operations Manager for the City and County of Denver, Colorado. Matt has a political science and history degree in American politics from the Metropolitan State University of Denver. All right, welcome all of you. I'll start with some questions first, and then we'll take audience questions as well. Maybe first off, to start on the positive side, what are you seeing as beneficial uses of AI in elections, either at the local or state level? Anyone who wants to go first?
I think the locals on this question in particular will be a lot more interesting because there is a real divide between the way state election offices are using AI and the way local election officials are using AI. And frankly, it's a divide unlike really anything I've seen in recent history in elections, where at the state level, election officials are very tepidly just dipping their toes in the water as it pertains to using AI. it's important to remember that in 2023, really, when the sort of chatbots and AI really entered the zeitgeist, it was all about the risks and the fears of AI. And a lot of state governments and governors said things like, we're going to create a task force and we're going to talk about, come up with responsible ways for our state government to use AI. And state election offices are part of state government, while, even the independently elected constitutional offices don't necessarily fall under the governor's policies in that way. They're not necessarily going to get ahead of where their governor is. And so now we're sort of starting to see in very specific use cases, state election offices experiment with AI for things like, the phone tree at their office, or, generating PowerPoints or summarizing legislation, because there is just an absolute metric ton of legislation at the state level. And so those are sort of the very tepid use cases that we're seeing at the state level. And I know that we're seeing a lot more experimentation at the local level. So I will pass this to the locals.
To echo what Amy just said, be wary, AI is scary. That's what we heard is, there's lots of problems that will arise. There can be no good from that which is new. And so be wary. And then last year was slightly busy for us local election authorities. And so we really didn't have a whole lot of time to innovate because we were busy running elections. And it certainly wasn't a time to do something new. This year, or 3/4 into this year, it's a little bit slower, a little bit more time. But I will say that to lead up to this conversation, I reached out to my IT department, because my IT director for the county, and my county is directly west of where we are, so we're not far away. We're in the metro area. So welcome to our hometown. We appreciate you guys being here in St. Louis, Missouri. So I reached out and I said, hey, my wife and her business, she's heavily using ChatGPT. It is incredibly helpful. I'm amazed at what she's able to do with this AI program. This is really cool stuff. Can I use my budget to get a ChatGPT account or a Gemini account or whatever else, Canva, because my daughter, who's a middle schooler, is using Canva for her classes. Like, this is kind of cool stuff that my daughter and wife are using in the private sector. I'm like, I would like to use it here. And they're like, well, we are just now having the conversation about AI use in the county. So I can tell you, one, no, you can't use any government money for it. Two, if we allow it, you will have to have a full workup of what you will use, how we'll use it, and how you will mitigate the risk. Emphasis on mitigate the risk. So I'll probably just use my own personal money to get a ChatGPT account because it's not that expensive. And I will do what all the other IT employees do, because they all use their own personal money to use ChatGPT in the IT department for the county, even though the county doesn't let them use their money. So it's one of those things. I will seek forgiveness rather than permission, because our county is focused on what could be wrong. Now, to answer the question that was asked, what have I seen as good? Which I'm sorry for monologuing. The one thing that we saw last year that helped tremendously was by putting more information on our websites and AI providing that information as people start to Google, where's my polling place? What's on the ballot? Where do I go? That greatly reduced the number of people coming into our office, calling our office, emailing our office, because they're able to find that information more quickly. So that was the number one thing that we've seen is the most help, but it's going to be a slog to use it more innovatively than that.
Hello. I just want to say, Kurt, by welcoming you to St. Louis, being the director of St. Charles, I'm really offended by that, being the director of elections for the city of St. Louis. But anyway, I will say Amy mentioned how it's like kind of trickling down. I would say it's kind of the case too for local offices as well, because it's was talking to someone before the panel started about how when you run an election board, it's kind of, you inherit elections. So it's not like you're starting from scratch. It's not like you can come in with a clean slate of things you want to do. I mean, things happen very slowly, like at election boards, because of that organizational structure, and then also because you also inherit a voting public as well. I mean, so they have expectations of what they see as far as what their expectations are for election day, how you interact with your election board, things like that. So things like ChatGPT, I'm not even sure if that's AI really at this point. I don't know what you all kind of do and talk about, but like we use AI sometimes in our office as like a sounding board. We are kind of increasing certain departmental capacities of what we do. For example, like we just added like an outreach position in our staff, and we also added like an ADA coordinator. Those are competencies that we previously didn't really have. So when we're trying to develop kind of workflows for those positions, a lot of times they will, consult with ChatGPT. They'll ask you questions about best practices, things like that. But in the end, it's always kind of a human being at the end that's making decisions. So it's kind of like using that information, just like you use any information, to kind of drive decisions. But ultimately, it's because of the organizational structure that I mentioned, like what you inherit. Like you have to kind of filter that through that lens. So that's been our experience with it.
Is it on now? Okay. I just wanted to add, because I think Amy's point was really important about the differences at the state and the local level. Although one of the things that we've been trying to keep in mind, especially as members of, like county associations and NACO and things like that, is the broader picture. And Kurt and I were talking about this earlier. Our counties are dealing with data centers that want to come in, and the other policies and consequences of AI gaining in popularity and in use. And so I think there is some tension there between how I feel like our office can utilize AI responsibly and still be able to fit into this broader picture of what does it look like regulatory-wise and how it affects our county when we're having conversations about, do we have enough water resources? Do we have enough electrical capacity and things that are related to the general production of AI and how much we want to use it responsibly?
I don't have too much to add after that. I think, generally speaking, people were scared because, people were kind of conditioned to be scared about AI and deepfakes and how it can impact elections that way. But now that there's a lot more excitement around it and what they can do, and when you start hearing things like, oh, you can run your cast vote records through after each election, so if you post them online, you're going to know if there's any issues or anything you need to address before that. I think people are really starting to get excited about the possibilities of what AI can do and how it can help them. But as Brianna was saying, then there's also the security concerns and some of those that you have to be concerned about as well.
Amy, to follow up, you said states have been kind of cautious about this. Are there particular states that have been more on the front foot on this, or maybe moving more in that direction?
Not right now. I think right now what we're really seeing is exploratory, and we're really seeing experimentation internally. I think we've all everyone here sort of referenced the risks, but the mitigating factor is sort of the human in the loop. So humans need to review everything. And so it's a good first step, and we're seeing, I think, like in communication departments in particular, like using, within the bounds of policy, chatbots to do a first draft of a press release or things like that. But, and even some graphic creations. But the human in the loop review piece is really important, especially, I would say, with graphics, because you can't easily edit a graphic, and ChatGPT and the other tools sort of notoriously do creepy things to human bodies, but also misspell things like election or vote, or make tweaks to skylines that are sort of notable, and those are things that negatively impact the image of the office. And so I do think, like, internally there's some experimentation with drafting social content, drafting press releases, summarizing legislation, I think is another one because of the absolute mountain of legislation. But at this point, when I say tepid, I mean like truly very, very tepid, and there's a lot of uncertainty about sort of how to use it responsibly and not create more work for yourself also.
Amy mentioned summarizing legislation. I know that's every state trying to keep track of legislation is a big chore. Have the rest of you seen positive use of AI in that regard, or concerns, or
Certainly in Colorado at an association level, and we're trying to teach clerks and staff more about this now, but that's really low-hanging fruit for our group, is to go through legislation because there is so much. We're not like a state like Texas, thank God, where they may have thousands of election bills in a session, but still with everything else that clerks have to do, being able to have the ability to summarize it. But along with that, and I think just to kind of foot stomp Amy's point here, especially for people who are just sticking their toe or realize they're just sticking their toe in the water. I think Commissioner Palmer said this earlier. People have been using AI, whether they know it or not, for a long time. AI is not an authority. It's more of an assistant. But so many people, when they first jump in, they'll go and it'll produce this 8-page long, email or report, and you're like, oh, this is amazing. I don't have to do anything now. And when in actuality, you still have to do a lot of work to verify, because we've seen AI make things up out of thin air that's not even there. So even when you're having it summarize legislation, for instance, you still have to go and do diligence and still follow up and check on it, because it could just be blatantly incorrect. And one of the things that I love when I'm telling my folks about this back home, the example I just love to use, and you guys will get why, is when Mike Lindell's attorney got sanctioned in court for filing a brief that had incorrect legal citations, and it was all AI generated. So it's a great way to teach, and it's also a little fun to poke somebody who's such a support of our community like that. So.
I think some of you touched on this question a bit already, but I'd sort of like to turn to more the concern side. What are your biggest concerns about the use of AI in election administration?
And I guess this is the cousin to in the Office of Election Administration, but I think that as Ben was talking about inheriting a voting community and knowing what your community is doing, having to keep an eye on whatever disinformation is coming out of your community or what kind of AI uses campaigns in your community are doing, I think it's something that I'm already thinking about and trying to figure out, is there a way for us to be proactive in this space before that happens? Should we be trying to educate our voters on how to navigate AI information more than what they're already getting, because they're not always the best at consuming information in the first place? And adding in this new component, I think next year will be very challenging. So I think it is something that our office now has to add to the list of considerations as we're doing preparation and creating communications plans.
I will say, so we've had a couple situations, not situations, but we've been approached by, say, vendors that were selling something a widget you could stick on your webpage that serves as a chat bot. And, kind of kick the tires on that as far as trying to see what the utility of it. And it does seem like there's a lot of utility to something like that. However, I think you have to be conscious, but before you put that out there in front of voters, as far as how it's going to work, because I think someone in the presentation earlier mentioned, if there's just one crack, if there's just one mistake, it could lead to just kind of it's not a good look at all. So that's something we're concerned about. Then also, sometimes in the social media content we put out, the person who does that for office was trying to kind of doing voiceovers with AI, things like that. And whereas the voiceovers, the content was fine, nothing, but just something about the look of it, like the presentation, how tinny it kind of seemed. And then with, the idea of deep fakes, things like that, as far as, I think you have to be kind of, at this point, two steps to the right of that in a lot of ways, just to make sure that that trust level's there between you and the populace. So those are some concerns that I see.
One of my concerns is sort of the difference between the publicly available chatbots and the private chatbots. So, the ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini, whatever, like we're just, using on the internet versus what is being subscribed to and someone is putting, on an election office website or a state government website. I think the publicly available chatbots are a real concern because of the way that I think some of these companies are approaching inaccurate information about elections. And we've seen this in other fields in social media companies with this sort of on-off approach where, we have a policy about inaccurate information or civic information in an even year or in the 6 months before an election and the 6 days after the election or something like that versus having an always on approach. And so that is something that concerns me because I don't think that you can weed a garden once a year or every other year. I think it's something that has to be happening on a regular basis. And to be clear, I don't think it is the responsibility of those companies to be policing that information, but what I would like to see them do is push good information. So I think it is a responsibility of those companies to direct people who are asking questions about elections to authoritative sources of information 365 days a year, every year, even odd, regardless of what is happening. And I don't think that a lot of the companies approach it that way. I think some of them approach it that way in an even year or, on occasion. And so that to me is sort of an ongoing risk because when you're asking questions about an election, you might be asking questions about a local election that's happening in, on a Saturday in September in an odd year. And if you're not getting directed to a good source, that's problematic. I also think, and we've all sort of talked about it both on here and on the previous panel, the way that AI is sort of everywhere. And so that is also a concern in sort of search results because I'm talking to a lot of academics, so I'm sure you are dealing with this in your own work. But when you Google something, for example, there's like an AI summary at the top. Well, in the last couple of months, one of the issues we've had is someone Googled something about an election and Google said that this candidate won. Well, that's cool. The election hadn't happened yet. And that's not the first time we've seen that. And so that is also a concern for me, is not just when voters or users are opting in to using chatbots, but when people are just looking for information about an election and they're being served AI-generated information that is not correct. And then, my other concerns are sort of the big ones that we've had for a long time where AI lowers the barrier to entry for bad actors. So it lowers the barrier to entry for bad cyber actors because now you can, work with a chatbot to develop malicious code. Or you can work with a chatbot to draft a really effective phishing email. And that is a bigger risk, right? We all used to say that one of the hallmarks of a phishing email was like the English wasn't quite right, or the spacing was wrong. And now those are getting a lot better because the barrier to entry is so much lower, and humans are going to click, right? It's not a government thing. That's a human thing. We're all going to click on the cat video. We're all going to, open it. And so that remains a concern. And then, as others have said, the sort of lowering the barrier to entry for the creation and spread of inaccurate information about elections. It seems there's so much inaccurate information about elections right now. It seems silly to say like AI makes it even easier. But I think it will continue to make that easier as well.
Would you all like to see your state or local government adopt an AI policy, or is the technology moving so fast that a policy would not be worthwhile? This is sort of continuing from the earlier session.
I would not like to see the state do it. I think it's appropriate for county level offices to take a look at their own needs and build a use policy around that. But any other regulation going above that, in my experience, has been it tends to go too far. So let the people who are elected at the local level determine what's best for their shops, and then go from there. But certainly putting out best practices or guidelines to think about as you're building a policy, I think is appropriate. And I think conversations like this are good to help identify those. But there's so much great work and innovation that's coming from the locals. Let's not handcuff them and overregulate them. Let's just give them some guardrails to think about and let them go and do great things.
I would like to see states develop AI policies for usage of AI within their own offices. I think Matt, and I'm guessing the other locals up here agree generally with what Matt said. But I would also just remind all of you, especially the non-election officials in the room, that there are very few states in which local election officials are employed by the state. So that generally, right, is an AI policy for a state election office or a state office, unless it is a law or a regulation, would not roll down. But I would like to see state election offices develop policies for their own usage to make sure that we're covering all of our bases, because I think that's the only way you can ensure responsible usage of AI by everyone in your office, right, from the chief election official down to your intern. You want to make sure everybody is on the same page about what is and isn't acceptable.
So as a county election official who is elected, yes, I would agree that I would love guidance, best practices, suggested policy for local policy, but it is so hard to do an all one size fits all approach at the state level. Certainly, it's impossible at the federal level. And so here's things to look out for. Here's recommended things to put in a local policy. I think would be a huge help, because while our counties are on the larger end here in Missouri, most of our counties are very small and they have limited resources. And so for the state to say, hey, here are best practices that we have gathered at the state level or from a national level, that'd be a huge help for so many of these small local election officials.
If you have audience questions, please write them down on one of the note sheets in front of you and bring them up or wave them around. Another question for you all, particularly the election officials. Ben, you mentioned a vendor has already approached you about doing this either in the area of constituent communications, either phone or web-based. Is this something you all are thinking you will do yourselves, or are vendors going to be providing these services? What does that look like?
I
Or do you
was
think that's
I was totally planning on inventing my own chatbot. I think it would have to be something driven in that way. I mean, a lot of the elections space, as far as innovation, is kind of driven by vendors and what products they have to offer. Just because I think, on a resource level, not a lot of resources internally to kind of push those kind of things. Just kind of as a parallel, we in the city of St. Louis are surrounded by St. Louis County. St. Louis County has a ton more resources than we do. I'm not sure what St. Charles' situation is, but a lot of times we find ourselves driven by what St. Louis County does. So it's because also it's the same region, same kind of market of voters. You kind of you're conscious of trying to provide a consistent experience for voters across the region. So, I think it'd be something where someone would have to drive it in that way, and someone would have to be an innovator, take a risk, I guess, in some way. And it would have to be proven before it would be trickled down to smaller offices. That's what I think.
I'm going to disagree a little bit, only because I think that what we do see in Missouri, I'm only going to speak for Missouri, is that some of these vendors can get in pretty easily with these smaller jurisdictions because they're leveraging some kind of like reputation of working really well with some larger jurisdiction, not necessarily in Missouri, but somewhere else, coming in and saying, hey, this works really great. And it's not even going to cost you very much because you have so few voters. It's going to be a really easy thing. And so they adopt it without asking very many questions. And I think it really is in use in a lot of our smaller communities, especially the ones that are chatbots or, like Text My Gov and all those kinds of things are being used all throughout the state already. But the concern with that is that we're not really interpreting that as AI. Like, I think to a lot of communities, that's not considered AI. That's just considered good customer service. And nobody's thinking about it in that way. And to shout out state associations and what Matt does in Colorado, I think that that's something that state associations are going to have to start doing, is playing this role and educating members on what is considered AI and how to see it in that vein.
Just to disagree with Ben because that's fun. I mean, obviously there's a space for vendors and AI, and I think that Brianna's point that I don't think we always all understand what AI is and means, and my own personal understanding of it is limited to my own experiences, and where talking to other election authorities from other jurisdictions, where I see they have had success is using AI as a tool, as a means of helping to communicate more clearly to either different groups, whether that's a demographic group or geographical group, or a way of making sure that your language is communicating what you mean it to communicate. And so either as a starting point of, hey, I want to communicate X, start the draft so I can make it clear, or here's my email, clean it up for me so I don't inadvertently offend a large group of people because I don't recognize a bias I have. And so I think that AI can be used well there, but it has to be done at the local level where people are understanding what it can be used for, how it can be used, and which platform actually would answer those questions. Because quite honestly, like anything else, you get out of it what you put into it, and if you don't know what to ask it or what prompts to give, it's not going to give you very much. But it's what the vendor space is going to look like in the future. That I don't really know, but it's going to be fun.
Okay, this question is for the Missouri election officials from a Missouri legislator. Colorado and Utah have an innovative AI disclosure law. Is this something you would like in Missouri? Do you know what this means?
Is that on campaign?
Or-
This has been created by AI?
Right, or exactly, or if there's a video that's put out that's been altered in any way, you have to disclaim claim that on the video.
I mean, I think that would be helpful. More information is better. I think in our community, and this wasn't even election related, but there is a festival that happens every year, and it's fairly well attended, and they had a t-shirt design contest, and the person that won had used AI to create the design, and Facebook comments were crazy. People were pissed. It had a really chilling effect on the actual festival because people were so upset that the people that put on the festival chose this AI generated thing, and it wasn't bad looking, but it was offensive to a number of people that AI had been used in that process. And I think, how people see AI being used, there may be spaces where they think, well, that's off limits. Nothing in AI should ever touch that. And so disclosing things and saying, I don't know how I would feel if I saw an election calendar or something that was created by our office that at the end said created by ChatGPT. I would probably instinctually not trust it as much, even if it's accurate. So I think it can be really beneficial. I think it would be something else that we would have to make sure that we were doing in our offices too, because we would have to disclose that as well if we were using it.
So I will answer this in my two hats. As in my hat as an elected official who has stood for office for 13 different elections, I would support something where anybody running against me or me running for myself would say, hey, this ad was generated by ChatGPT. We had a case here in Missouri where a person from my county, it's always my county, did like a 30-minute long AI generated hit piece against our current Secretary of State using Will Shatner's voice, which was great. So something like that it was badly done. But making sure that that's, hey, this was generated by ChatGPT, not, oh yeah, William Shatner came to Missouri to criticize the Secretary of State here in Missouri. Anyway, under my hat as a director of elections, I don't really care what happens on the campaign side of things. I'm running the election. How the campaigns run, it doesn't matter, except for the fact that it may generate negative questions to my office. Hey, so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. They think that our office is the Ethics Commission or is the police of elections, which we are not in either case. And so I try to tell people, like, we don't monitor the campaigns and how people try to get elected or keep people from getting elected. That's totally opposite of what we do. So in one side, I'm ambivalent. The other side, I think it's a great idea.
I just want to echo Curse. People expect us to pick up the yard signs like after the election's done. So it's like I can't imagine what calls that would generate as far as us expecting us to police something like that. But who knows?
To follow up on something that Kurt mentioned and Amy as well, I guess so some of the problems with misinformation or harassment of election officials, election deniers, these are problems that predate AI. But has AI made it worse, made it better? Does it offer a tool to combat misinformation? Or, what do you all think about that?
So you've sort of asked two questions there. In terms of threats and harassment directed at election officials, anything that makes it easier to create communication en masse doesn't help on that particular metric. Now, I want to be clear, I don't have any personal knowledge of threats or harassment used creating AI, but it stands to reason that it does lower the barrier to entry for creating that content. In terms of actually educating the electorate and putting out reliable, accurate information about elections, I do think that these tools, and particularly the public-facing chatbots, can be really valuable, provided that people are directed to good information about elections. So I participated in a conversation in 2023 with one of the big chatbot AI companies, and they were like, well, our policy is just if somebody asks a question about elections, we're not returning an answer because we don't want to get it wrong. And I said, that's an approach. Wouldn't it be better if instead of that, and instead of you trying to answer the question, you directed them to the source that knows the answer? And that's that's a known entity, right? I work for states, right? So that's 56 state and territorial websites. Don't try to answer the question. Just direct them to the best source for that information. And some of the AI companies, I think, have taken that approach. But like I said, I would like to see all of them do that more regularly, which is instead of trying to answer a question about elections and instead of, scraping whatever site, just direct them directly to the best source.
Another question from the audience. Have you considered using a chatbot to help train poll workers or seen that used anywhere?
Considered it. I have a person on staff who does my poll worker training, and I might have mentioned that in passing. He thought I was going to fire him and replace him with a chatbot, and so we've drastically pulled back on any poll worker chatbot training for job security. But we're actually in the process of reshooting some of our training videos. So some of our poll workers are coming to our office, and they're actually at our office right now doing this. And they're working on updating our films. And honestly, I feel like part of me is like, well, it might have been faster if I just asked ChatGPT to do this. But voters don't usually have 6 fingers, and so I figured real people doing real training might be the best way to do it. Whether we do it in the future, I don't know. But right now we prefer the authenticity of real people providing real information.
One of the approaches I've heard that some local election offices have used is that they have sort of uploaded their poll worker manual to an AI tool. And so it provides the ability for poll workers who are dealing with thousands of voters, if they get a question that they don't know the answer to, instead of thumbing through hundreds of pages, to be able to sort of easily search or ask that question of their sort of custom chatbot to cut down on the service time. That is one of the options I've heard.
I was going to say, I don't know what that, like the question being using AI to train poll work. I don't know what that looks like. I mean, I can't imagine it in some way. So if someone here who asked that question knows what it looks like and wants to talk to me about it, I'd be happy to hear what you have to say. But as far as working, poll workers interact with the public on election day. We expect them to be comfortable with the equipment, and as far as trying to to evaluate how the comfortability with what they do, I think it takes a person to do that. But if there's another approach, please come tell me.
So I think Mike mentioned earlier that the technology is moving very, very quickly here. I think this is particularly an area where the technological competency outruns what we know or what we are able to do. So where do officials go to get good advice about this? And how do you deal with the incentives of, say, vendors who want you to buy their AI product versus your own needs, which may be quite different?
I came here. I was hoping to learn. And when I was at the Election Center conference in Salt Lake City, I attended a couple of the, is Noah still in the room? Anyway, some of the election groups' AI conferences to learn about AI as best I can to understand this, because that saying early on of be wary, AI is scary. That's only good for a little while, and then I'm like, this is a tool, and we need to be able to use it, or at the minimum know how to defend against it. Because any type of tool can allow people to do good or bad, and we need to know what are the capabilities so that we know how much communication, misinformation can be given, and how can we use it for good information.
To some extent, I think that this is just an extension of the conversation we have about cybersecurity and how to make sure that we're well-versed enough to be able to do that. And so some of that has already been built into our offices because we've had to do that, and we've built better relationships with our IT departments, or have third-party IT resources available to us now. But kind of as I said before, I think this is where state associations are playing a really big role. And as the three of us are here, we will bring back to our association conversations about AI and try to be a reference point if we need to be. But it is definitely one of those things that has added another thing on our list of ever-growing technology understanding, and probably the only thing that is preventing it from moving faster is that we don't have the money to pay a vendor to do things. If we were all flush with money, then we would have more of this already in the system, and we can't, so it's stopping it.
Just to reinforce what Brianna was saying, I think this is where both national associations and state associations can help. We can direct them to NIST or other places that have these great white papers on it, but election officials have neither the time, and a lot of them don't have the technical expertise to be able to take a lot of that in, but they do mostly trust their associations. And so that's where we are grateful for partners like TAG, Microsoft, others who are doing a lot of work in this space and getting out to associations so people can ask questions. They can ask questions in those conference settings where there's other people they feel comfortable asking questions in front of, which is really important. And they don't have to feel embarrassed if they're just starting and they're nervous. They don't have to be embarrassed about asking some of those questions.
At the association level, and I feel confident it is the case with both the Missouri Association and Colorado as well, right? It's not just about us presenting content to our members. It's about building the networks across the association. So, I work for all 50 states, DC, and the 5 U.S. territories, and we work really hard to sort of foster the network and foster the relationships between those people, and they are talking to each other all the time, like to a level that I sometimes find very annoying. And I feel confident that our private sector partners in this room also find it very annoying because good news travels fast, bad news travels way faster. And, when we're talking about the role of manufacturers, or pardon me, when we're talking about the role of vendors in this, right, all it's going to take is one person to say, I had a bad conversation with this, or I got a bad vibe off this person, or we had a really good experience with this, and then all of a sudden you're going to start to see it spread, or at least those conversations spread. And so that, I think, is a huge role for the associations, is fostering those connections to each other so that when jurisdictions have questions, it's not just that they have a venue to ask those questions in where they feel safe, which is very important, but also they have a person somewhere else that they can talk to about this who is maybe dealing with it and has a different approach.
All right, here's a very specific question. What is the most scarily accurate or inaccurate election-related output you have received from ChatGPT or other AI tools?
I would say calling the results of an election before the election has taken place is pretty bad. So I'm going to lean on that.
I mean, I've heard this hasn't happened to me, but I've heard from some of my folks where they've tried it and it's given back basic dates wrong, like election day wrong, that kind of thing. So again, assistant, not authority, right?
I think interested in what you all have to say about this, particularly Matt. As AI technologies are increasingly applied to election management, there are concerns about security, of course. How can public institutions maintain a security capability that's always ahead of the private sector?
That's an interesting question. I think I'll speak more broadly to the security aspect. And I think you've heard themes of this interwoven from all of us here today. It's really important that, first of all, where different parts of the community can help us setting up best practices, sharing different use cases. But each individual county needs to have their own user agreements, guidelines in terms of how it's used. What's happening with your PII, is that in danger of going out? Make sure you understand the companies or the tools that you're working with greatly. Who has access to it? Can somebody, if you're building a turnout model, let's say, can you have somebody else from the staff who hasn't been involved go in and upload, I think this, and just start going on. So you have to have strict guardrails around what companies you're using, what do they do with your data, how do you protect your data, who from your shop has access to those tools and is allowed to input data into those tools, because it does matter so much. The outcomes depend on what's going into it, and so you don't want, as Amy said, somebody coming out and saying, somebody's already won before, or getting an election date wrong. So just like with any other enterprise agreement that you will have with software companies or whatever else that looks like, you need to do the same thing with AI. Even something like ChatGPT that you have on your desktop, you have to be so careful to do it. But the good news is a lot of these procedures are already in place in other parts of your IT department. So just carry that over to make sure you're dotting the I's and crossing the T's on AI.
The public sector is never going to outpace the private sector. I mean, we're always behind and playing catch up. And part of it is because, we don't have staffing to just sit around and think. We have staff to do, and usually not enough of it. And so, usually, and by our nature, we usually want to wait to see what are the best practices, what is, we like others to figure out where the shortfalls are, where the roadblocks are, so that we can then have an easier path. And also, since we have to ask permission to spend any money to buy anything, we have to have justification until there is a clear path of this is what this will do, as opposed to I hope I can accomplish this with this money. It's very difficult for us to buy anything. So we are always more reactive than proactive.
One last question. This is a follow-up, I think, on something Brianna mentioned. The local election officials here, you all represent relatively large jurisdictions, over 100,000 registered voters each. Are there worries or dangers with many smaller counties using AI chatbots, either from a vendor vulnerability or mis or disinformation?
I am not more worried about a smaller jurisdiction than I am about a larger jurisdiction. Because again, it's about dotting I's and crossing T's and making sure you're aware of what these tools can do and what they shouldn't do. And somebody's inability to, or lack of understanding of what that looks like is not jurisdiction specific. Traditionally, smaller counties tend to be a little more conservative in their approach because they don't have bandwidth, they don't have time than larger counties, but larger counties make mistakes just as much as smaller counties do.
I do worry a little bit, probably not more, but in a different way, only because I think one of the things that we see, probably not just in Missouri, I've seen it in other places too, is vendor capture of a lot of our offices, because we have not just elections in our smaller jurisdictions where, Kurt's only doing elections. I'm a larger jurisdiction, but I'm also doing tax rates for railroad and utility companies and merchant licenses and things like that. And it becomes more and more attractive, I think, the more that you have to do to say, hey, this AI thing can proof your ballots for you. And a small jurisdiction uploads their ballots to it, proofs it, doesn't notice that there's like a missing race on the ballot, and then sends it to the vendor, and the vendor does their proofing, and the election jurisdiction gets it back a week before the ballots are due to go out to a poll, and they run out of time to look at it before it goes out, and then a major error happens. Could that happen in a larger jurisdiction? It absolutely could, but I think the tendency to have people stretched a lot thinner in these smaller jurisdictions is a concern that I have.
I only worry about smaller jurisdictions more than locals, to the extent that often smaller jurisdictions don't have the budget to attend national conferences, don't have the budget necessarily to be a member of an organization that is pushing best practices or pushing guidance. I will say, since the declaration of elections or designation of elections as critical infrastructure in 2017, we've seen more state election offices take a heavier hand in training at the state level, whether that's frankly establishing a training program or requiring a level of training. And so that, I think, moderates some of my concern, because if the state election office can be providing some of this information, I think that is really great. But, historically, particularly with the local election official associations, which, to be clear, I am not, but not every jurisdiction nationwide is a member, and it's a budgetary thing. And so that is like my only sort of moderate risk for smaller local election jurisdictions is just that they're not able to get as much of the risk picture from some of the national bodies that can provide it, and therefore might not be as informed. But again, I do think that this is changing as states have gotten more involved with state associations, and there's been sort of a more organized effort at education.
All right, thank you all. It's been really interesting to hear what you have to say about these issues.